Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I work for a moving company that handles jobs across different cities. The work means dealing with awful parking situations all the time, especially when customers live in packed, downtown areas where finding space is nearly impossible. About a year ago, I got sent on a job that needed me to drive nearly 90 miles to another city with my team. When we showed up at the address, I saw the problem right away. Construction next door had taken over a massive chunk of the sidewalk with equipment and barriers. The sidewalk normally fit 2 trucks side by side since the area had tons of businesses, but the construction had eaten up about half that space. The street only had one lane going our direction, and traffic was heavy. I had to figure out fast where to put the truck. If I parked completely in the street, cars would get forced dangerously close trying to squeeze past. So I angled the truck partly onto what was left of the sidewalk, making sure there was still plenty of room for people to walk by without stepping into the road. This kind of parking is completely legal in my country when you're actively loading or unloading. We started hauling stuff out of the building. The customer had a lot to move, so I knew we were looking at about 2 hours of work. Around 30 minutes into the job, I spotted a middle-aged man on a bicycle pull up beside my truck. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the truck from different angles. I didn't react. People take pictures all the time for whatever reasons. It wasn't worth paying attention to. Then he walked right up to me and said I needed to move the truck right now. I told him I couldn't do that since I was working, and besides, there was clearly enough space for people to pass safely. He asked what would happen if someone with kids and a stroller needed to get through. Right at that moment, a woman pushing a stroller came walking down the sidewalk past us. She looked confused by the two of us, staring at her while she easily got around the truck without any trouble. I smiled at him and went back to work. He said my parking was illegal, and I needed to know that. I told him it wasn't illegal and suggested he could look up the laws himself if he wanted. That's when he started yelling, repeating that the parking was illegal and screaming at me to move the truck. My first co-worker came out of the building right then with boxes. He asked what was going on. I explained some jerk was trying to make me move the truck, but it was nothing unusual, just typical nonsense, so he should ignore it. My second co-worker appeared behind him carrying more stuff. He asked the guy whether he had anything better to do than bother people trying to work. The man said he'd call the police if I didn't move the truck. The three of us just smiled at him and kept working. We knew he had no actual power here. This wasn't even close to our first time dealing with someone who didn't understand parking laws. He pulled out his phone and made what looked like several calls. I figured he was probably calling our company and the police. He kept yelling about how we were breaking laws and being inconsiderate. We completely ignored him. We had 3 more jobs after this one, and we're already facing at least 2 hours of overtime, even without this guy wasting our time. About 15 minutes went by with him still standing there. He announced again that he was going to call the police if I didn't move. I laughed and asked him who he'd been calling for the past 15 minutes then. He went quiet for a minute before starting up again with his speech about illegal parking. That's when I noticed a police car driving down the street behind him. The officers inside looked at our setup, slowed down a bit, smiled, and kept driving without stopping. It was the middle of the afternoon by now, and the whole area was packed with delivery vehicles, mail trucks, food delivery vans, supply trucks for the shops and restaurants. Every single one was parked partly on the sidewalk exactly like mine. I pointed this out to him, saying maybe he should go bother all those other drivers instead of just me. I thanked him for the entertainment and said I'd really enjoyed the whole thing. His face went completely red. He looked like he might explode. My co-workers and I had enough at that point. We told him to leave unless he planned on paying our wages for all the time we were wasting dealing with him instead of helping our customer. He finally got back on his bicycle and rode away. I figured that was it. Turns out I was wrong. Later that evening, my second co-worker was scrolling through social media and found a post. The guy had gone home and written a whole rant about our encounter on his page for his 100 or so friends to see. He made me out to be some inconsiderate jerk for parking there and said we'd all been incredibly disrespectful to him. He even mentioned that we'd thanked him for the laughs. At first, I didn't really care. Just another angry person venting online where it wouldn't matter. But then I got to the end of his post. He'd actually admitted in writing that he'd called the emergency police number to report us, not the regular non-emergency line that people are supposed to use for complaints. The actual emergency line meant for life-threatening situations, and the dispatcher had warned him that if he called that line again for something like a parking complaint, he'd get hit with a fine for misusing emergency services. I laughed so hard I could barely breathe. This guy had been so convinced he was right that he'd tied up emergency resources over a completely legal parking situation, and he'd almost gotten himself fined for it. The construction crew next door had watched the whole thing. When we finished loading everything into the truck, a few of them walked over asking what that whole scene had been about. We explained the situation and they started laughing. Everyone who works in packed city areas deals with difficult parking all the time. It's just part of working in cities. When we got back to our office that night, we told our boss the whole story from start to finish. He laughed until tears were running down his face. He couldn't believe someone would be that ridiculous. The job ended up taking the full 2 hours we'd guessed, plus the overtime we'd already expected. But for the rest of that week, whenever any of us remembered that man on his bicycle calling emergency services because a legally parked moving truck had slightly bothered him, we'd start laughing all over again. I needed a few things from the store, so I decided to make a quick trip. My hearing aids had been sent off for repairs a few days earlier, which meant I was pretty much deaf without them. I grabbed my rollator and made sure my service dog was ready to go with me. My dog isn't just a pet. After I came back from deployment, things were different. The PTSD made even simple tasks feel overwhelming sometimes. Loud noises, unexpected movements, crowded spaces, all of it could trigger me. My dog helps me navigate through those moments, keeping me grounded when my mind starts racing back to places I'd rather forget. The hearing loss came from my time in service too, along with some other injuries that make getting around harder than it used to be. The rollator helps with mobility, and I always keep a cane in the basket for grabbing things from high shelves. It was unusually warm inside the store that day. I took off my coat and tossed it onto my rollator along with my cap. I was wearing my favorite shirt underneath, a bright royal blue long sleeve with this neon green design on it that definitely wasn't appropriate for work. My hair was pulled back in a ponytail to keep cool. I moved slowly down the aisles with my dog walking beside me on my left. One of my quirks is that I can't stand seeing things out of place. Shelves that are messy bother me more than they probably should. So when I walked, I straightened items here and there, lining things up neatly. It's just something I do without thinking about it. I was completely focused on what I was doing, unable to hear anything going on around me. My dog suddenly turned around and started pulling, which was strange. He was trained to alert me to potential problems, and his sudden change in behavior should have been my warning. Before I could process what was happening, someone yanked my ponytail from behind. Hard. The force nearly knocked me off balance and sent pain shooting through my scalp. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. Years of training kicked in automatically. I drove my elbow backward into whoever was behind me, then brought my fist up in a strike to their face. I grabbed my cane from the rollator basket, spun around and dropped into a defensive stance. My heart was pounding and adrenaline was flooding my system. I hit the emergency button on the medical alert necklace I wear and shouted out what happened and where I was. The dispatcher confirmed the police were on the way. On the floor in front of me was a woman clutching her nose. Blood was running between her fingers and dripping onto the store floor. She started screaming that she'd been assaulted by an employee. I yelled back at her using the voice I'd learned during my service. I asked her what made her think I worked there. I told her I had a rollator and a service dog and that I didn't work at the store. I told her she was the one who assaulted me. She got up from the floor still holding her nose. She insisted that I worked there because she saw me straightening the shelves. I yelled that straightening shelves didn't mean I worked there. I explained that I have OCD and liked to straighten things. She told me to quit lying. She said I worked there and assaulted her. She said she was going to get me fired and that I was going to jail. She kept pointing at my shirt and saying, "Employees wear blue shirts." I told her to look closer at what was actually on my shirt. She squinted at the neon green design and her face changed when she realized what it was. My dog was barking frantically, trying to do his job. I was shaking and tears were streaming down my face. The adrenaline, the confrontation, everything was triggering a response I couldn't control. My breathing was getting faster and my chest felt tight. My dog pressed against me, trying to calm me down the way he'd been trained to do. He kept nudging my hand with his nose and leaning his weight into my legs. Store employees rushed over, followed by the manager and security. A small crowd of customers had gathered at the end of the aisle watching everything unfold. Within minutes, police officers arrived. They took us to the office area and separated us into different rooms. An officer came in to take my statement, while a female employee stayed with me. She brought me a bottle of water and some tissues. I was still crying, still trying to get myself under control. My dog hadn't left my side. The officer was patient while I explained everything. How I couldn't hear her approach, how she'd pulled my hair, how I'd reacted on instinct. I showed him my medical alert necklace and explained about my hearing aids being in for repair. He wrote everything down carefully and asked me several questions about the assault. After what felt like forever, the security team and police finished reviewing the camera footage. An officer came back into the room and told me the footage showed everything that happened. He said it clearly showed her approaching me from behind and pulling my ponytail. He said she'd been following me for several aisles before she did it. He said my response was clearly defensive. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him yes, definitely yes. I could hear raised voices from the other room even without my hearing aids. When they told her I was pressing charges, she apparently lost it completely. She kicked one of the officers and fought when they tried to arrest her. They had to call for backup to get her under control. The officer who'd taken my statement came back a little while later with an update. He told me this wasn't her first time doing something like this. She had a history of harassing and assaulting both customers and employees at various stores. She'd been banned from 3 other locations in the area. There were pending cases against her from 2 other incidents in the past 6 months. With this incident and her resisting arrest, she was looking at serious jail time. The charges would include assault, battery, and assaulting an officer. The store manager apologized repeatedly for what happened. He said he wished his staff had noticed her earlier and could have prevented the whole thing. He handed me a $250 gift card for the trouble. One of the employees brought out several bags of dog treats for my service dog, who wagged his tail appreciatively. The manager kept saying how sorry he was, how this should never have happened in his store. I told him it wasn't his fault. He couldn't have known some random person would attack a customer. He offered to have someone help me finish my shopping and carry my items to my car. I accepted because I was still shaking and didn't trust myself to do it alone. A young employee walked with me through the store and helped me get everything I needed. He was kind and didn't ask me a bunch of questions about what happened. When we got to the checkout, the cashier had already been told to ring up my items separately from the gift card. She was gentle and understanding. I left the store that day with more than I came for. The gift card was nice and my dog certainly appreciated his treats, but more than anything, I left knowing that someone who made a habit of hurting people was finally going to face real outcomes for it. My dog walked beside me to the car, calm now that the situation was over. He'd done his job perfectly, just like always. When I loaded everything into my vehicle, I thought about how differently things might have gone if the cameras hadn't been there, or if she'd tried this with someone who couldn't defend themselves, or if my training hadn't kicked in when it did. I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home, just letting everything settle. My hands were still trembling slightly when I gripped the steering wheel. The officer had given me a card with a case number and told me I might need to testify when it went to court. I put the card in my wallet and started the engine. I've been going to Millie's Diner for breakfast most mornings for the past few months. The coffee was decent, the food was cheap, and it was close enough to my apartment that I could walk there even when the weather was bad. That particular morning started like any other. I pushed through the door and the bell chimed above my head. The waitress looked up from behind the counter and smiled. She asked if I wanted my usual spot, and I told her that would be great. I slid into the booth by the window, and she came over with a pot of coffee. She asked if I wanted my usual order of pancakes and sausage. I said that sounded perfect and asked if I could get an extra side of toast. She said it was coming right up. She scribbled on her pad and headed back to the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and stared out at the street. The town was just starting to wake up. A few cars rolled past. Someone was opening up the hardware store across the way. The door opened again, and a couple of guys I recognized from around town walked in. One of them nodded at me, and I nodded back. They settled at the counter and started talking to the waitress. My food arrived a few minutes later. Stack of pancakes, 3 sausages, and the extra toast I'd asked for. The waitress set it down and told me to holler if I needed anything else. I thanked her. I was about halfway through my pancakes when I heard shouting from outside. At first I thought it was just someone calling to a friend or something, but it got louder. I looked up and saw a woman standing in the parking lot across the street. She was yelling at a guy next to a sedan. The guy in the booth behind me leaned over and asked what her problem was. I said I had no idea. The woman kept yelling. Her arms were waving around and she was pointing at the car. The guy she was yelling at just stood there with his arms crossed. He looked annoyed but not particularly bothered. The other customer said it was probably a parking thing. I agreed. I went back to my food, but the shouting didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. Other people in the diner were starting to notice too. Conversations died down and heads turned toward the window. The waitress walked over to our side of the room with the coffee pot. She asked what was going on out there. The other customer said he thought it was a parking spot fight. The waitress said she knew that woman and that she had a temper, but this was ridiculous. The woman outside was practically screaming now. Even through the glass I could hear bits and pieces of what she was saying. Something about her spot. Something about being there first. A couple from another booth stood up and headed for the door. The man said they were going to see what was happening. The waitress told them to be careful out there. I finished the last bite of my pancakes and wiped my mouth. The whole thing was too distracting to ignore anymore. I slid out of the booth and told the others I was going to check it out too. Maybe we could calm things down. I pushed through the door and stepped outside. The cold hit me right away. The woman was red in the face and still going. She yelled at the guy that he had no right to take that spot because she was turning in first. The man said he was already parking when she drove up and that this was nonsense. She screamed that she saw it first and that people like him always think they can just do whatever they want. A few other people from the diner had come out by now. The couple who'd left before me were trying to talk to the woman, but she wasn't listening. I stepped a little closer and told everyone to take a breath. I said it was just a parking spot and there were plenty of empty ones. There was no need for all this. The woman spun around and looked at me. She told me to stay out of it because it didn't concern me. I said it concerned everyone when she was making this much noise. She turned back to the guy and I could see her getting even more worked up. Then she said it. She called him the N-word and told him he had no business being here. The people around us went completely silent. Someone gasped. I felt my stomach drop. I told her there was no call for that kind of talk. The guy turned and walked toward his car. He yelled that she had crossed the line. The woman yelled after him that he better walk away. But he didn't walk away. He went to the back of his car and popped the trunk. When he turned around, he had a gun in his hand. Everything happened at once. People started screaming and running. I dove behind the nearest car and crouched down low. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then the gunshots started. They were so loud I thought my eardrums were going to burst. I heard glass shattering and metal crunching. The woman was screaming. I kept my head down and my hands over my ears. It felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. When it stopped, I stayed where I was for a minute. My hands were shaking. I heard the guy spit and then footsteps running away. Slowly, I stood up and looked around. The woman was on the ground with her hands over her head. Her car was full of holes. Glass was everywhere. I walked over to her and asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. She was just staring at nothing. I told her that help was coming and to just stay still. I heard sirens in the distance. Someone must have called right away. The police showed up first and then an ambulance pulled in behind them. The officers started putting up tape and asking people what happened. One of them came over to me and asked if I could tell him what I saw. I said it started as a parking dispute. She got really upset and said some racist things to him. Then he pulled a gun out of his trunk and shot up her car. The officer asked if I saw which way he went. I pointed and said he went that way, toward the back of the diner. I said he took off running. The officer thanked me for my help. The paramedics loaded the woman onto a stretcher. I heard one of them asking her if she could feel her legs. She said she didn't know and that everything happened so fast, people started drifting away. Some went back into the diner, others just left. I walked around the block trying to clear my head. The other customer from the diner caught up with me and asked if I was all right. I said I didn't know and that the whole thing was insane. He said it was hard to believe it happened over a parking spot. I said I hoped she was okay even after everything she said. He said he felt the same. We walked for a while without talking. Eventually, I headed back to the diner. I needed another cup of coffee. The waitress saw me come in and poured me a cup without asking. She said they caught him. I asked if they got him already. She said, yeah, just a few blocks from here. The police got him pretty quick. I said that was good, I guess. She agreed. I sat there for a long time just drinking coffee and staring out the window at the empty parking lot. The tape was still up. There were bullet holes in the pavement. That was how my regular morning turned into something I'll never forget. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.